Hi there, my friend. I want to thank RG175 for sponsoring this episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. Great schools thrive under great leadership. At RG175, we understand that finding the right match between a school and its next leader is a defining moment for both heads and trustees. With extensive experience in independent school leadership and a highly personalized approach, we guide boards through thoughtful search processes and support school leaders through key career transitions. Whether you're looking for your next leadership opportunity or seeking the ideal fit for your school, RG175 is here to help. Visit rg175.com. Again, that's rg175.com to learn more, because behind every successful school is a great leader. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. So this is really exciting. I've got one of my very early guests. I think may have been episode 3. And so, we're into the 50s at this point by the time you're listening to it now. Kevin Folan, head of school, Providence Country Day. He and I had a conversation over a year ago on the pod where he was breaking down how they did this really effective tuition reset. And what's been interesting about that is that it kind of prompted a whole bunch of other things that came after. And we're going to get into some of that in a little bit. But before we do, Kevin Folan, welcome to the podcast.
Peter, great to be back as always. Very excited for our conversation.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about what came after we had that podcast. I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of people reach out. They listen to that episode. They're curious about tuition resets being one of the tools in the tool chest in terms of how do you mitigate rising prices? How do you increase your addressable market or the total number of families that could potentially afford your school? And, you and I has had a bunch of conversations since then. And one of the things that we did was wouldn't it be fun to write an article about this? And we ultimately reached out to NAIS. We had an article that was published in the winter edition of the magazine, which was called Rethinking Tuition Resets for Sustainability. And today we're just going to dig into basically what did we cover in that article and what have we learned and what are some of the essential questions that schools should be thinking about if they think that a tuition reset is the right thing for their school and their strategy. But before we do that, I think one of the big premises of the article is that there's an essential question that you have to answer before you start the process. And that is, you may think that the tuition reset is something that is the answer to your problems. But before you do that, you really have to dig in and think about and answer, what problem are we truly trying to solve? Is it a price problem? Is it a program problem? Is it a market problem? Whatever. Could be any number of things, could be combinations, but getting to that answer is so critical. And Kevin, I'll throw it over to you. I know when you did this process, what were some of the things that you were thinking about in terms of trying to identify the true problem that you were trying to solve at Providence Country Day?
Yeah, sure. No, great question. And I think this is kind of the foundational question that everyone has to ask themselves as they are jumping into some of this work. It's crazy. This is year 6 for me at Providence Country Day, East Providence, Rhode Island. The school has experienced a significant change the last 6 years. And it's wild to think that it's been about 5 years since we announced our tuition reset. And for anyone out there, know that at least our story has been a very positive, happy one. But again, I think a lot of that is predicated upon some really important, difficult work that we as a board and administrative team did to make this successful. Some of those early questions were around, why are we unable to grow our enrollment? When I started in 2019, we were just under 200 kids. The good news, fall of 2024, we opened up just under 400 students. And I think part of that was because of the tuition reset. But I think a big part of it was because of just some of the work that we were doing as a school, as an organization, looking at our mission, looking at some of our aspirations, and ultimately asking the question around value. How do we offer value to our students, to our families, to our alumni? And I guess the tough answer for folks is, a tuition reset it's not just a kind of a simple solution that's going to work for everybody. In fact, for those of you who listen to that podcast, we really launched our strategic plan with kind of this 3-pronged approach of being accessible, leaning into being personal, and then also being relevant with 3 key things tied to each one of those 3 letters. And the accessibility piece was around, making PCD more affordable for families in our area.
How did you how did you figure out that that was the issue for you, you had to solve in terms that it indeed was a price problem?
So I will tell you, I mean, some of it was a leap of faith, right? Where we did the work, we knew the math, we knew all that, all the data. But I mean, for anyone in the industry pre 2018, 2019, tuition resets were very, very taboo. In fact, I think my board hired a consultant long before I ever came here and said that if you do a tuition reset, you are going to go out of business. And I think that was the prevailing mindset for many, many years, perhaps up until some of the success that we have enjoyed. And I think in large part because, and I know people don't like to look at it this way, right? But as a school, we are essentially a luxury product or luxury service. And I think oftentimes the quality of said service or product is tied to that price point. And so it really was kind of this theoretical discussion around if we reduce our price significantly, what is going to happen to the perceived value of the school? And again, I think because of some of these other initiatives that we undertook, and also at that unique moment in time, right? That was kind of in the midst of the pandemic. We were able to hit it out of the park. And so from a purely strategic pricing standpoint, here in the Providence, Rhode Island market, roughly in 2020, we were, middle school was $35K, high school was $40,000. And that's basically where our independent school peers were. On the bottom side of the market, there were parochial schools, high-powered, reputable parochial schools that were right around $15,000. And so we saw, roughly a $20,000, $25,000 gap. And we wanted to figure out, was there a way for us to stay within striking distance of the Catholic schools, but then enough of a gap, ideally a $15,000 gap between us and the other independent schools, to at least entice some of these families to come and check out our program and our school. And again, I think right now the results speak for themselves.
Let me ask you, what kind of demographic work did you do to understand that this was that indeed it was a price question that you had to solve?
So we dove in pretty deep on market view on NAIS. And so we did our demographic research. And I think that one of my teammates, they discovered that by dropping tuition to where we ultimately did was going to open up the school to 6,000 additional families within about a 25-minute drive to the school. And I think for us, almost that stat alone was enough for us to realize, I mean, even if we get 1% of that, that is going to be enough to move the needle for a school our size, right? So increasing 60 additional kids for 1 year, that was a significant number for us to really consider. And of course, that 1% number, it's ironic that in the fall of 2021, after we announced the tuition reset, we added 52 additional students to our student body. So it wasn't quite 1%, but almost that exact number that we had kind of put our arms around.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that, I've done sessions on Market View in my member community, Moonshot Lab. Like everybody I talk to, I'm like, if you're not using Market View, you've got to use Market View. I mean, it is just a tremendous resource and they continue to build on it to make it even better. It's a really easy way for you to look at your catchment area, like what are the zips that people are coming from, and see, how many families can afford you at different price points. You can literally adjust the price in the tool to be able to understand how many families would be able to access your education at the full list price. And it really, to me, is like the first place you need to start. If indeed you're thinking, okay, this is based on like the research that we've done internally, the conversations that we had, like this is where we need to go. What a tool to be able to help you figure out in the early stages what you should price your tuition at.
Yeah, that was incredibly helpful. And then I think for us, the important internal number for us to also grapple with was just our discount rate. I know that's one of the things that we talked about a lot in our article. And for folks who don't know, the discount rate is really just that number of what is your sticker price divided by the amount of financial aid that you are giving out, and then what are you collecting on average per family. And so for us, that was a significant number. I am not going to reveal exactly what the discount rate was, but it was higher than what we wanted. And so the market was really telling us that regardless of what our sticker price was, families were only willing to pay up to a certain threshold on average. And so that's why we were able to land on a 36% tuition reduction. So our new middle school tuition would be $22,000, and then our new upper school tuition would be $25,000.
Right. And if I remember correctly, the key, I think one of the reasons why tuition resets in the past have been taboo is because the lever you pull is, well, let's just cut the price and people are going to come running through the door. And that's just not the way to do it. If I've, talking to you and others who have done it successfully.
Correct. And I'm sure some of these kind of naysayers have reached out to you. They've certainly reached out to me either on email or at some of these conferences, these tuition resets don't work. You're right. And well, let me couch that in. It depends. It depends on the context, depends on the school. Because again, the way that we rolled it out was that this was part of a strategic series of initiatives for us. Kind of a thought exercise. If we could go back in time and if we just did the tuition reset, I'm not sure we would be having this really positive conversation in 2025. But we did these other things. And then the other piece for it, I think something that also sustained the momentum was that we also did this strategic merger of an elementary school, right? Because back in 2019, 2020, we were grades 6 through 12. And in 2021, we announced the acquisition of an elementary school. And so we did a series of different things to really increase the momentum and buzz about the school.
Yeah, I mean, the lesson that I've taken from you, and if people go through the podcast library, you're going to see, I think, at least 2 other episodes on tuition resets. One with Lucy Leposki, who's a higher ed consultant, works with colleges on resets, and the other with Chris Watson, who's currently the head at Soundview School and will be the head at the executive director at the Northwest Association of Independent Schools starting this summer. And the tuition resets in isolation, I think, if you just did that and you threw it in the market, people are going to start to question your value. Oh, is the school going under? Like, what kind of financial problems are they having? Like, all those kind of questions are going to start to emerge. However, there's a way to counter that. And this is what I love about what you did and Chris and others is that, yeah, great. We're going to lower our price to be more accessible to our market because we know like this is really kind of where the market is, but we're also going to amplify our value. We're going to do a series of things to showcase why our institution, our school offers just this top-notch educational option for families in our area. And like, we're going to have to be very intentional and strategic about rolling those things out in sync with rolling out the tuition reset. And that's kind of exactly what you did, right?
Absolutely. And I think it also comes back to really being very honest about who you are, right? What's your school mission? What are your values? Our school motto here is play the game. That's something that's really imbued in everything that we do. And again, as I got more and more familiar with the school, with the alumni base, and with the Providence market, PCD was really known as more of kind of this down-to-earth independent school. I think some of the bells and whistles that you'll see in some of these other places, that's not really us. Yet we had this super high price tag. And so I think it really gave us the ability to kind of walk the walk a little bit more. Folks would talk about accessibility a lot, but hey, we're really doing something that really kind of backs up and defends what that term means here at our school.
And now a word from our sponsor. Leading a school today can mean juggling a dozen different systems across offices, finance, fundraising, marketing, enrollment, and academics, all pulling your attention in different directions. At Blackbaud, we believe it shouldn't be that way. That's why we built Blackbaud's Total School Solution. It's a fully connected solution designed for private and independent school leaders who want a clear view of their entire operation. From tuition to transcript to donation, you get one ecosystem, one login, and one source of truth. This isn't about more software. It's about smarter strategy. When your systems work together, you spend less time chasing down data and more time leading. Want to see what Blackbaud's Total School Solution could do for your school? Visit blackbaud.com. That's BLACKBAUD.com to learn more. What were some of the initiatives that you rolled out in concert with the tuition reset? I know we talked about it before, but if somebody hasn't listened, it'd be great for you to roll through some of those.
Yeah, so again, in 2020, we announced the PCD Quest. It was our strategic plan. It had 3 pillars: accessibility, personalization, and then being relevant. So the accessibility piece was really just around affordability and the tuition reduction. Um, the personalization piece was really coming up with a very tailored plan for each individual student. Again, that was something informally that we did. And what we wanted to do was more brand it and then formalize what this meant. So we were calling it the PCD playbook. Really our specific effort to make sure that every kid's potential was being tapped right off the bat. And then the final piece was being relevant. So again, we remember back in 2020 during the pandemic, online learning, at least in my opinion, became very, very mainstream. And so we launched the PCD Online Academy, which was an asynchronous model for the PCD education.
Mm.
What that also did was that created an important revenue stream for us, because inevitably there were some alumni and other key constituents who would ask the question, Kevin, what are you doing in my school? And part of the response was, we have come up with some alternative revenue streams to ensure the financial health and safety of the school during this time period.
How did you communicate that to your constituents?
That specific piece or the entire thing?
The entire thing. I mean, it seems like, what I'm hearing, and this is, something I talk about with schools a lot, is like, okay, you need that vision. Like, what is the vision that we're trying to achieve? It may be aspirational, it may seem far off, but like it's pointing us in the direction. So you did that. You had your pillars, you had your strategic plan. But really the key to it is making sure that it's socialized amongst all your constituent groups. Because if you don't, then you're going to get those questions. Kevin, what are you doing in my school? Right. Like, so how did you do that?
So I think it's important for any organization to make some intentional decisions about where they really want to invest resources. And so for us, especially at the board level, we had just a couple of brilliant minds that could really help us with the math and the data piece to understand where we wanted to be from a pricing perspective. What we wound up doing was we wound up hiring a marketing consultant and a communications consultant to help us with the rollout, because we knew, again, just how important it was going to be for us to communicate very effectively right off the bat, and that we would not have another bite at the apple. Again, especially given, some of these prior consultants telling us, tuition reset, this is not going to go well for you. So we wound up hiring some folks to help us with some of the branding and some of the communications around this. And so I remember it was October 1st of 2020. We had this highly choreographed rollout to local press, and then a series of basically press conferences, and then Zoom town halls with current families, faculty and staff, parents, and then alumni.
How did the outreach to the press go? Did they pick it up?
They did pick it up.
Wow.
They picked it up in a big way. So we got both some local press and then also some national press.
Wow.
So again, October 2020, I think, again, my own opinion, I think the press was maybe looking for a positive feel-good story, because I think typically, private schools, you only cater to the socioeconomic elite, and then here's this little private school in East Providence who's actually reducing tuition by almost 40%. Like, what's the story there?
Right.
It was a pretty captivating headline, I think, for a lot of local outlets. So we had a bunch of folks outside of our main admin building when we were doing this announcement. And then I got some local TV and then radio spotlights as well. And so it really did garner, I think, just a lot of intrigue from people.
Were you able to draw a line between that press outreach and the way they amplified the story and families that were applying, or at least inquiring about the school after you announced the reset?
Oh yeah. I mean, our inquiries blew up. I mean, right off the bat, I
Like,
think we either doubled or tripled inquiries the first year.
wow.
But again, that's only part of the story, right? So you
Yeah.
get folks into the admissions funnel, and then what? And that's where that notion of value, I think that's where it's so important. Because if your product, if your service, if your school is really poor and weak, then it doesn't really matter what you're going to charge. And again, I think one of our thoughts was that we have a great school here that, for a variety of reasons, folks were overlooking, probably not even coming to the campus.
Mm.
And so what this was going to do, this was going to draw eyes, draw some attention. Let me go check that place out. Let me see what they have going on. And lo and behold, inquiries, applications, and then certainly our yield rate for year one was through the roof. I know talking to other schools that did tuition resets, I think after year one, maybe some of that momentum started to fade. And I think because of this multi-pronged approach that we took in conjunction with the merger and acquisition, we have been able to sustain this over, again, 5 years now. And then I think the most important metric that we have for success is that each year, our average net tuition revenue has gone up,
Oh, wow.
even before the tuition reduction.
What happened to your financial aid budget? I mean, I assume you still have a budget for that.
We have a financial aid budget, and it has gone down significantly.
Has it? Yeah.
It's-
Right, because you're at a price point that there are a lot of families who can afford the full tuition or close to it, based on
Exactly.
your
I
market.
think like a lot of independent schools, we had this barbell effect where we had families who were paying $15,000 or less, and then we had a few families on the other end who were paying, the full amount. And that gap in the middle, 22, 25, 27, we didn't have many of those.
Right.
And again, looking back at some of the data, the bounce rate from the website, looking specifically at our tuition page, we had this theory, this hypothesis that, what would happen to all of those families who left that website if the tuition price was something a little bit more within the realm of their possibility.
You mentioned something that we've talked about kind of off mic before, is that, you roll out the tuition reset, you're going to get that big bump, it's difficult to sustain. And clearly you all have sustained it over this 5-year period with all those stats that you just, shared. Like, what are some of the things tactically that you've done? Because I imagine your tactics have had to shift over the 5 years, but how do you communicate? How do you essentially communicate your value prop based on that price point?
I continue to think that it's about leaning into mission and some of the original messaging that we came out with.
Oh, so you're still using it?
What's that?
So you're still using the messaging, some of the messaging?
We are. I think especially
cool.
The notion that PCD is a personal place.
Yeah.
When families enroll here, even when families are looking, every single family gets at least 15 or 20 minutes with me. I'm sure for some families, maybe that doesn't make a difference, but I think sitting down with the ultimate decision maker conveys to prospective students and families that if my kid comes here, I'm going to be seen, I'm going to be known, I'm not just going to be some sort of number. And at least here, I think that's been really, really important and effective, even as we've grown.
Yeah.
I think another important thing that we've just tried to pay a lot of attention to is just student attrition. And I think that this is one of the things that schools need to look at as they're trying to diagnose the problem. I think having an enrollment issue is one thing. If you are finding that you are getting families, but then they're leaving after a year or two, I think you need to drill down to something besides just the price point.
Yep.
Because if they come in year one, they're willing to pay a certain price. If they're leaving, what does that mean? And again, I think that comes down to really taking a hard look in the mirror and what are some of your strengths as an organization you need to lean into a little bit more intentionally. And then what are some of the things getting in your way? And ultimately, why are some of these families leaving? And our student attrition rate it's been excellent even before my time here, which again, I think gave us further evidence, further proof. We just need to get more families in the door because once they come, they stay. But it's something that we have continued to stay even closer to the last 5 years to ensure that that the word of mouth, right? Because our customers right now are going to be the ones who are telling their friends and families about all the great things happening on campus here.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about, okay, you're looking at the problem, you think it may be a price point, but you have to look at all these other areas within your school to figure out, okay, is it really a price point or are there other things at play? Attrition being, a great example of data that you should be diving into and understanding. I'm curious, for you, you've talked a lot about how this is all rooted in your mission and rooted in your overall strategic plan for the school. How can a school that's like, all right, I'm listening to this, some of the stuff that Kevin faced, like we're kind of facing some of that too. I know I now need to go do the research. Is it an attrition problem? Is it, a marketing problem? Is it a market problem? Is it a price problem? Like what is it that we're trying to solve for here? But if they do land on the idea that it is price, and it could be for sure. What like how do you make sure that you align this reset with mission and that it doesn't dilute value? I mean, I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like if you were gonna, if a head of school were to call you today and ask that question, what advice would you offer?
If the head of school contacted me and asked me that, I would just say, make sure you are aligned with your board. Because I think if a head of school is going out on their own and doing this, I think that could be a pretty tricky endeavor, especially if things do not go well. But I think sometimes as a board and upper administrative team, I think sometimes there can be an echo chamber of, if only people knew about how wonderful our school was. And I think on the one hand, you need those real advocates and proponents of your school, especially if your school is struggling. But then who are going to be some of the folks who are really going to hold a mirror up to you and ask you to take a look at some of these things that you really need to improve upon?
Yeah.
And I think in doing that, you are probably going to need to invest some time, money, resources into improving certain facets of school life, including maybe human resources.
I'm curious, as you've been going through this process, did you look at the admission journey that families were going through, and did you make modifications? I mean, was that an area that you identified as, okay, like we can dial things up there?
Definitely.
Yeah.
We're a small shop. So when I started, we had 2 people. We've added a 3rd person. Still, I'm sure much smaller than some of my peers. But again, continuing to lean into the personalization and making people feel special and that they have been seen. I think some schools, they will wow families with facilities. Our campus is really nice. I don't think we are going to win full pay families over just with the buildings alone. And so that's why we've really tried to lean into the relationships, the communication, the handwritten notes. I think things that maybe sound a little bit old school, but again, things that I think make students and families feel like they're going to be known here at our school.
Yeah. It sounds like that's a reflection of your values as an organization.
Yep, I think it is.
Yeah. Hey, as we begin to wrap up here, I know we talked a little bit about advice that you would offer a head, but let's say a head or a board called, they listened, they're intrigued by this, but they're hesitant. What would you recommend?
Yeah, do your homework. Talk to some other schools who have done tuition resets. There are a lot of positive stories out there. I also know that there are negative stories out there. And I would ask these heads and these boards to really jump into, the success stories. Does any of this sound familiar with the school paradigm that you currently have? And I think fully admitting that there's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to fix an issue for a school. Again, there has to be some sort of multi-pronged, multi-tier approach in order to solve some of these institutional challenges.
Great.
But also to not be afraid to be bold. I know that our board, the last 5 or 6 years, they feel energized, they feel motivated, because I think prior to that, they felt like maybe we were dying kind of a slow death. And so we took some really big swings. And I think folks are feeling really, really proud of the work that we have done.
Well, I mean, going from 200-ish to 400, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be proud. You're making a big impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I mean, certainly the most rewarding work of my career.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, absolutely. It's a legacy, right? You're stewarding the school to, a new place. Hey, Kevin, if somebody, you had said you get a lot of calls, right? So maybe you're gonna get some calls after this one, but like if somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would say shoot me an email, Folan@providencecountryday.org. I love talking to people about this. Inevitably, every time I talk to someone, I take away a lot of different things as well. I'm always trying to improve, iterate, be creative in ways that I'm serving, my faculty and staff, our students, our parents, and our alumni. So would love to talk to folks as they are grappling with some of these challenges.
Kevin Folan, head of school, Providence Country Day in East Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you again. It's always fun to chat, my friend.
Peter, thanks for having me, my man. Appreciate it.
Hi there, my friend. I want to thank RG175 for sponsoring this episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. Great schools thrive under great leadership. At RG175, we understand that finding the right match between a school and its next leader is a defining moment for both heads and trustees. With extensive experience in independent school leadership and a highly personalized approach, we guide boards through thoughtful search processes and support school leaders through key career transitions. Whether you're looking for your next leadership opportunity or seeking the ideal fit for your school, RG175 is here to help. Visit rg175.com. Again, that's rg175.com to learn more, because behind every successful school is a great leader.